Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the exciting topic of balancing work life and family in a lean and mean world. But don't worry, this isn't going to be just, another, I don't know, self help type of rant or whatever. I'm going to assume that not everything is all right. I'm not going to be painting a rosy picture for everybody. I'm not going to try to be overly pessimistic at the same time. But we're gonna look at the world as it really is. Now we have all at some point probably seen headlines about how working mothers still face special challenges or some similarly worded headline. And sure enough, there are valid interests and concerns in those headlines and those stories, and I'm not trying to lose sight of all that. However, at the same time, my radical alarm has to keep ringing, and it says, well, okay, what are some of those special challenges that working mothers and people like them face, and how many of them are 100% necessary? Because to me, it seems like a lot of them are actually conditional. They may be rooted in culture in some ways, and some of them might be arbitrary hurdles that are placed in people's way. Well, at least arbitrary to the people who faces them, but they probably exist there for some reason that is questionable at best. You know what some of those challenges are? I think you already know that deep down inside, paying bills to all of those capitalists and those capitalist overlord fat cat types, they know it as well. And they dominate land, property, money, resources, and decision making. I mean, that's just a fact. So there it is. I said it once again, just telling the truth in a very basic way. You were not just born into a job 100% naturally, right? Even if you're born into a position of privilege or poverty, those are some systemic things going on. Like in most cases, I suppose if you're born in a natural disaster, well, that would be an exception. An exception. That's not probably a purely cultural issue. But that does not describe most cases of poverty or wealth. You know, you get these special challenges in life because over time, for better or worse, you are trained into some of them, and in a lot of cases, in a lot of ways, possibly choked off from other options. And by you, I don't necessarily mean you specifically, but people overall who may or may not be like you specifically, but who probably are. And still, in the context of a capitalist country and a capitalist global economy, it does indeed make some sense to adapt to these special challenges, right? I do it, you probably do it too, for better or worse. That's just how it is. Because you probably have to head out and do a goddamn job or something like that, unless I suppose you might be on disability or something. And if you're a parent, there might be a 100% practical desire to have things like preschool education and daycare so your kids have something to do other than stay at home and veg out in front of the TV or possibly just rot away while mommy and or daddy or some other parental guardian type is off trying to pay the bills. That's why people want things like preschool and daycare. It's not and school in general. It's not just for an education or socialization. It's also for safety reasons and because parents cannot be there all of the time. So there's a real practical reason for it, a very general sense that it's a good thing to have things like those. And of course, you want preschool and daycare to be of a certain quality to provide a sense of a home away from home. And again, this isn't just some vision of a paradise on earth. You don't have to be some socialist lunatic or something to have these crazy thoughts and ideas. This is some practical, down to earth type shit. So by 2023, and soon enough, the even more modern sounding 2024, it seems like this stuff could be taken for granted. Like we should have preschool and daycare just as a general thing, and you want your kids to be taken care of by the same culture and society that demands you head out to work for 40 plus hours a week. That makes sense, right? You give them something, they should probably give you something back in return. Well, not so fast though. Some people really have a problem with that. And I think you might already have an idea of who some of those people might be. You'll, of course, find some Republicans tweeting things like universal daycare is class war against normal people. Yes, that was something that was really tweeted by Republican dipshit J.D. Vance, who elaborated, and this is again is an actual quote apparently. He said normal Americans care more about their families than their jobs and want a family policy that doesn't shunt their kids into a crap daycare so they can enjoy more freedom in the paid labor force. So, yeah, this is somebody that people out there saw fit to actually elect and put into a public office, a place of public trust where they actually have sway over policy. So, isn't that quaint? So, when we try to say that we have, a modern understanding of the world and we're more advanced than we ever were before, well, there are people like JD Vance to step up to the plate and they'll hit a home run in the complete opposite direction. And, they play the game a little bit differently. Well, JD, according to Republican talking points themselves, Americans are supposed to work because they care about their families. That's part of your narrative. So, as a consequence, some people want daycare because it's just a practical thing to have if you're supposed to be out working. Otherwise, who's going to take care of your kids and make sure they're not drinking bleach from underneath the sink and stuff like that? It's the Republicans who, for generations and generations now, have talked about the freedom of the paid labor force. After all, aren't these the same dipshits who, year after year after year, say it's the lazy Democrat liberals who hate freedom and who hate hard work? And here they want it so that, you know, if you want to work hard, well, nobody can take care of their kids. So if you want to take care of your kids, you're going to have to stay home and not go out and work. Um, that doesn't sound right. What about that actually works? That's not really a stable situation, and it's not a stable system. Sounds like things could easily go awry. And that's why we end up with these, work life balance questions, because we get a lot of, arbitrary hurdles placed in people's way that probably shouldn't be there. So, these people also want to yank away quality childcare. A lot of them want to get rid of school lunches, or at least free school lunches for kids. Some of them probably just want to, like punch kids in the face when they see them or something. So okay, that might be a little exaggeration, but it certainly seems like it. You know, uh, at least for the families who aren't well off already, with the not so hidden message that women don't belong in the workforce. They're the ones who are supposed to stay home and take care of their kids. That's the message. The guys can be out cheating on their wives as much as possible, going to the bar, uh, slacking off at work. It doesn't really matter. It's the women who are supposed to stay home. According to the constantly implied messaging by J.D. Vance, who's got that beard to cover up his dumb little baby face. He's trying to look like the brawny man, I guess, because that's what's happening to a lot of these conservatives now. Like um, Ben Shapiro put on a beard. You've got the fat Wolverine, Ted Cruz, who wore a beard just to look better. And sure enough, it works. But um, the funny thing is, though, it's obvious that they're hiding their insecurity by even having these beards in the first place. Something about it was getting to them that people were possibly suggesting that they're not as manly as possible. So they're like, you know what? I gotta put on a beard, and that way I'll look tougher or whatever. It's funny, but I'm getting a little sidetracked. But anyway, the messaging is that you dumb bitches just need to stay at home like a birthing machine for the Christian male utopia, while the J.D. Vances of the world collect taxpayer money as politicians and some clout for turning the clock back to the days where women couldn't own property or maybe were even suspected of witchcraft. You know, it really depends on how far you want to turn that clock back. And if you doubt that witch trials, literal witch trials, are possible, well, you might want to talk to Republican lunatics like Greg Locke and Nick Fuentes about that. They might tell you an interesting story about, you know, uh, their beliefs in witches who need to be burned and stuff like that. You know, go ahead and look into that. It's an interesting side effect of making America great again, is that we're returning to an age of witchcraft fear mongering, satanic panics. Like a new one comes out each and every day that they're really trying to run with and uh, have a lot of fun with. And by the way, year after year, the Democrats fail to note that even as Republican politicians rake in taxpayer dollars as a matter of course, these same right wingers rail against government services, quite ironically. So, talk about Democrats failing at messaging, which is partly why we're in this embarrassing tailspin back in time to begin with. Meanwhile, people like Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who's obviously out to prove Tim Pool's assertion that Republicans are more attractive than, liberals, are actively rolling back restrictions on child labor. That's right, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the whatever she is, the son of the lame ass bass player, on Fox News, Mike Huckabee, who was jamming with the Nuge. But anyway, she's trying to roll back, you know, uh, restrictions on child labor, turning the clock back, because we obviously can't have daycare, but we can have them working dangerous jobs for low pay and few to no benefits. So it's like a message to the kids: not good at math, no problem, little Johnny or Janie. Here, grab this pickaxe and get black lung in this unregulated mining operation instead. You'll learn a trade, and maybe you'll live. you know, Granted, I'm sure a lot of those young miners did live back in the day, and they probably had some really impressive stories to tell. But I don't think it's necessarily the stories that you want your kids to be able to tell. And obviously, if things get bad enough and these kids go on strike, you know they'll be replaced by other kids, and they'll be more obedient little pieces of shit, or maybe they'll be replaced by a machine. They'll be trained into these values, and they'll be staunch defenders of child child slavery, which is basically what this would end up being. And if you want more rights and better conditions, maybe some cops or private guards will pay you a visit with a billy club until you see things their way because of freedom and shit. So what's wrong with this picture? You know? Meanwhile, liberals will write things like there are currently 56,000 fewer female executives than there were in 1997, according to a Harvard Business Review article. Well, that's not a real headline, but you get the idea. They always want to make it sound like the problem is a shortage of executives or whatever. But personally, I would be fine with zero executives in a more fully democratized economy, in an economy that functions sort of like a giant co op full of co ops. Maybe not perfect, but definitely better than, Sarah Huckabee Sanders sending your kids to the freaking mine, um, or some other dangerous job. Obviously, the mining operation is just one idea. So yes, some of the barriers to advancement and increasing employment among women are especially impactful for mothers. So you have an AmericanProgress.org article titled "The Childcare Crisis is Keeping Women Out of the Workforce," and that can be true. But again, the fundamental question should be, whose workforce is it anyway? Most articles will not even acknowledge the existence of individuals or families with less than $10,000 in annual income. It's like they don't want to admit that, people are out there who don't make hardly any money. And aside from that, you know what they'll never do? They'll never promote a scenario where someone can still comfortably earn so little and be happy either, because that's not the right messaging either. It's it's always going to be a crack of the whip, and anything short of that, it's just not right. So I myself have had plenty of years where I earned a puny amount of money, and whether it was my fault or not, it was partly because I recognized the futility of the rat race. Sorry, I kind of lost my voice there. I knew people who made considerably more than I did, yet did not look any better off than myself, because they had to pay bills upon bills, they had obligations upon obligations, and even if they tried to look happy, you could tell the strain was there. And some of them, of course, had failed marriages because of the money problems or whatever. Um, just a lot of stress, bad times. So, all this pressure to work hard, it didn't necessarily pay off for a lot of these people over the years. And I saw this firsthand. And, I could ask them, how much more money they were making. And sure, they might have been making a little bit more, but it wasn't necessarily that much more. And looking at my paycheck when I was working 40 hours a week, or maybe even more, it wasn't even that much more than when I was working like 10 or 15 hours. And that's the fact of it. And why is that the situation? Because, well, it's all bullshit to a large degree, and I think everyone knows it. That's why JD Vance can be so convoluted and really not give a fuck, because I think he knows as well as anyone that this system is bizarre and there's no real way to make heads or tails of its contradictions other than to just throw a bunch of nonsense out there. And they're they're gonna repackage the bullshit, use a divide and conquer strategy, point and laugh at the underprivileged or the already powerless. Blame them for all the problems in society. It's a tried and true divide and conquer kind of thing. It's a gimmick that's been going on for literally, as long as people have had social systems of some kind. And it actually isn't all bad, sure, especially not for everyone simultaneously, but plenty of it just does not withstand scrutiny the way we are told that it does. There will be scenarios where you're more likely to change jobs or leave the workforce, and you'll favor one way of creating a primary income over others, but we're all in this muck, and it gets thicker when we lack even a semblance of control over it anymore. And you know what? Some people benefit from the chaos, and that's the sad fact about when you have a society that has stratification built into it. And parents are bogged down uh, parental leave policies, and we know this wouldn't even be a problem if these parents were considered a direct part of workplace management. And there would likely be practically no debate anywhere over parental leave because the parents would already recognize that, yes, being able to spend time with families is every bit as important as work itself. Hell, it's probably more important. For a lot of people, that's one of the reasons they do work because they value their families, at least as much them as themselves or, the two-car garage or the lawnmower or whatever kind of material things that they have. But J.D. Vance, that misogynistic prick who has always argued against no-fault divorce, but then he like walks it back occasionally and that kind of stuff. And that's something that would leave women trapped in loveless, potentially abusive marriages. If they couldn't get divorced easily, and that's really the way some of these people want it. These JD Vance types, they don't care about parents overall being able to take care of their kids. They just care about them more in the abstract when they're unborn. As soon as they come out of the womb, then it's like, who gives a shit about them anymore? Put them in a mining operation, who cares? It's the fetuses that they care about. He wants women to be pigeonholed into that mother role and practically nothing else because that's what his nut job theocrat backers want. Be a stay-at-home mom or else. And it's sort of a weird thing to be forced into, um, especially when it's not even necessary to do it. I mean, there can indeed be more work-life balance if things are made a little bit easier. More countries are starting to recognize the challenges of balancing work and family life, and honest people will know that your level of stress in regard to balancing your work and family life is about the stressful nature of an anti democratic approach to work. Honest people, they will understand that. The solution isn't to have a legally mandated, I don't know, 60-hour work week for mothers or something like that, or even laws regarding parental leave. That's not just the solution. It's actually simpler than that, potentially. Workplace democracy, workers as owners. That way, this debate would pretty much not even occur in the first place. Don't get me wrong, there'd still be, minor details to work out. Having those laws make sense under the status quo, but also let's move past that status quo to the extent possible and just have it so that these things are totally the norm. Again, these policies offer mothers more flexibility in their working environments as well as the chance to take more time off. But to what extent could it even be a policy rather than simply common sense in an environment where workers themselves dominated the economy? It wouldn't just be a policy, but how things are, pretty much as the natural order of things. If it would be abnormal if things weren't that way. And is that really a utopia? That's another question. Or just something that rich pricks are selling as impossible. And, they can promote the idea of it being a tough nut to crack because they actively work overtime to make it a tough nut to crack. They'd claim that you're saying your working life is a utopian, radical, extremist vision. You'd have to be some raving Marxist lunatic. Well, don't believe the hype. I don't think you need to have read Marx at all or anything like that in order to want things like, daycare, healthcare, that kind of stuff. Some countries like Sweden and Finland, known for, stuff like that. They have more happy people and they're not complete totalitarian hellscapes. I mean, they're not completely socialistic or whatever term you want to use either. They tend to have mixed economies. They also recognize that compromises are valid between you know, work and family life. We should try to make it so work isn't just a burden, or family life isn't just a burden. And that becomes easier when both are made easier. And I'm pretty sure they rate higher on the happiness index for a reason. It's not just a wacky coincidence. And kids working in mines tend to look badass. I'll agree with that. If you look at old pictures of them, they look very serious and like they're ready to tackle any issue, or maybe win in a fight or something like that. That they grow them up quick if they're working in the mines, but you know they live hard and possibly die young, which sounds badass if it's a tattoo on some biker gang's arm. It sounds macho, but I don't think that's exactly the way that society should run. So anyway, that's about all I have to say about this, and you have a nice day.